Hello everyone, welcome to my second interview. This is the second interview that I'm conducting with Vivian Broughton, and she's here in Singapore right now conducting one of the training for Asia's first IOPT professional training. And actually Vivian met Professor Franz around about 15 years ago, and she has actually been using IOPT for the last 9 years. Of course, with her very intensive and extensive experience in psychotherapy, she has been doing it for 30 years. With her experience, and when she embarked on IOPT, she brings along with her much experience and much wisdom to understand about trauma. And other than doing psychotherapy works, she is also an author. She has written 3 books and also edited all of Franz Ruppert's English books. And today she's here to share with us about the trauma of love, which is one of the trauma in Franz Ruppert's IOPT theory. And if you want to find out more about IOPT, you can look for one of my interviews that's called IOPT 101. So let's hear from her today and understand a little bit more about trauma of love. Hello, Vivian.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. Yes.
Welcome to Singapore again.
Yes.
And yeah, maybe you can share with us a little bit about trauma of love.
Yeah. I've been got very interested in it very recently, because in a way I realized that I only properly understood it a short while ago. And the thing that I hadn't really taken on board was it's not just the situation where a mother cannot love the child. Mm-hmm. And of course, if there's a trauma of identity, which comes before the trauma of love, if the mother doesn't want the child, which is the nature of the trauma of identity, then she's not going to love the child if she doesn't want the child. But the thing that I hadn't really taken on board was the fact that, of course, a child, an infant, comes into the world full of love and wanting to love, with the capacity to love the mother, and looking to be able to love the mother. And so the trauma of love is not just about a mother not loving the child, but it's also about the mother actually rejecting the child's love for the mother. There's a very interesting bit in Franz's latest book,
Who Am I? That his book is out.
Yeah, in a traumatizing society. It's just come out in English. Under the trauma of love, he writes, every child loves his or her mother and relates to her entirely through his emotions. Since he's dependent on his mother, every child tries to give his mother love and hopes to receive love back. And that's the bit that I feel is really what it's about, is this giving, like hoping child, I love you, will you love me back? And of course, because of their own traumatizations, this is not possible. And so the child's impulse to love the mother is rejected. And this is extremely painful. And the result then is that the child in us spends our entire life trying to be united with our mother, trying to give her love and to gain love back. And this can affect our entire life.
Right. So it is almost like a courtship. It's like a couple trying to give love and then also at the same time trying to receive.
Yes, well, I suppose you could say that's what happens in adulthood. Of course, we relive this experience in all our relationships.
The same way, the same pattern, the same dynamics.
Absolutely. And experience more than not the same disappointment and rejection.
Right. Yeah, but this is also very interesting because many people feel that when we give birth, it's about the parents loving, it's about the child needing love, you know, and but this point about the child is also having the capacity to give love. And they want to give love. And this is
if a child is integrated and whole in any sense, this is such a turnaround from how we have thought about children. You know, the whole history of our thinking about how to raise children has been one of control and socializing of the child, that as if the child comes into the world needing to be told how to be.
Right.
Whereas in fact the exact opposite.
They already know how to be.
Exactly. And if you look at films of wild animals, you look at films of big cats and having children, it's so obvious that there's this free engagement, emotional engagement between the mother and the child that's unhampered. But it's hampered in humans because we suffer so much from trauma. We suffer so much from trauma in our relationships over our history. I mean, we have a long history of making war on each other. Yeah. This has had a long historical effect on where we are today and how we are. And it's so different if you look at films of wild animals and their parenting and how the mother is with the child. And you think about what we do. Child comes into the world knowing intuitively, instinctively how to be. If we can leave them alone in that sense.
Right. Yeah, it's about leaving them alone.
In a way, yes. I was thinking.
So difficult, is it, for human babies?
I was having a conversation with some of the students yesterday about how deeply in us it is if we see a child, a baby suffering or a young child suffering, they've hurt themselves. What we try to do is take it away. So we try to comfort the child rather than allowing the child to have their distress.
Right.
We try and distract them from their distress. We sort of go like this and say, oh, it's all right, and all of this. And we try to distract the child from their distress. And one of your students said, which I thought was really interesting, a mother with a child, and she said, yes, I do this. And she said, I've suddenly realized I do it because I can't bear to see the pain of my child.
Yeah, of
so she said, I'm doing it for me,
yes,
not for the child.
Yeah.
Whereas the child is distressed. They have a right to their distress.
Right.
And really what I think we need to do is sit with them with it and hold them with it without trying to make it go away.
Right. It's the making it go away that you know, that reflects a part of ourselves that we can't bear.
Yes. We can't, I can't bear it. Therefore, I'm doing something for me, not for the child.
All right.
Already.
Okay.
Yes.
Just imagine the kind of things they do to a child to calm them down.
Yes, exactly. Put a dummy in their mouth, for example.
Right. Or shaking them, you know, like in Asia we have the, you know, what do you call that?
Yeah. I mean, it's a fine line, I think, between allowing the child their distress and being there, being present and comforting.
Yeah.
And then the different thing is trying to make it go away because we can't bear to see the child in distress.
Yeah, that's a huge
That's
difference.
a different thing. Yeah. And it's subtle.
Yeah.
I think it's quite subtle, the difference.
And therefore, what would be the result? I mean, how would the child then feel?
Well, of course, what we're doing, in a way, we're teaching the child very clearly to distract themselves from their trauma.
That's interesting. It's
And
a
of
form of
course,
distraction.
Yes, of course. We're teaching the child to distract
away
and
from-
deny their pain
Yeah.
already.
Right.
So then we all grow up thinking, no, I mustn't take any notice of my pain, I must distract myself, I must go into survival and so on, everything else that we know in IOPT.
Right.
And we learn it so early because our parents can't bear to see us in distress.
And that's trauma of love.
Yes.
But
It's all the whole lot, the trauma of identity and the trauma of
inability
love.
to give healthy love,
Yes.
healthy contact to the child.
Yes. And this deep sense of rejection,
From the child.
sensitivity to rejection that the child gets. My love is not good enough for my mother. I mean, what a thing to think, you know, to have to live with is my love is not good enough for my mother. She rejects it, she can't handle it.
So can you
And
give an
I
example?
don't get love from her.
Like my love is not good enough for the mother. Can you give an example?
Well, if the child comes with just unhampered love to give the mother, and the mother can't deal with it, and the mother looks away, this is a rejection.
I'm too busy.
Yes,
Don't.
well, she's
bother me.
traumatized, of course. This is why. Yeah, and so this healthy impulse of the child to love is rejected.
So that gives us some insights into what trauma of love is. How about maybe understanding it from a practical perspective, say maybe how trauma of love affects our relationship with our partners?
Well, the same thing gets lived out. Is I think one of the things that happens is that because our impulse to love is rejected, then the result of the trauma of love is we get very confused about what love is. So in the relationship between the mother and the child's love is rejected, but also the child doesn't receive love from the mother. Love is a two-way thing in its healthy form. So that one of the results is that we start to find substitutes for love. So like approval, or sex, or all sorts of things. Appreciation. If I do something for someone, what am I looking for? Am I looking for appreciation, recognition, approval? This is all confused with identification. So the whole locus of who I am gets externalized onto the environment, onto, for example, onto you. If we're looking at two people here, is the impulse is, am I acceptable in your eyes? This is identification, and this is also the exchange of love, but love gets very confused into acceptability, approval, and so on. I mean, Franz says, of course, the basic survival strategy of the trauma of identity is to identify with the external, is to make the as I said, the locus for who I am onto the outside. That's identification. And the survival strategy for the trauma of love is to make to develop illusions of love, so that I feel like I am loved. But it's not true, because I've made it into an illusion. This person loves me if I do an exam and I get the right results.
How many diamond rings my husband give me?
Exactly.
How many bouquets of flowers?
How many people want to have sex with me? You know, it feeds into sexuality, of course it does. And sex becomes a substitute for love, as does so many other things.
That is understanding of how trauma of love affects relationship. How about how does it affect our health?
Well, that's an interesting question. Of course, all trauma is held in the body. So this is the first thing to understand, is that the idea that we split in our psyche, that we split off the unbearable experience of trauma so that we don't have to experience it. It's not just an idea, it's not just a concept, it actually happens in the body. And the business of suppressing this experience so that we can function on a day-to-day level, this happens in the body, and it causes tension in the tendons and muscles. And in fact, you can look quite interestingly at people's bodies and how they hold their body, and you can see the tensions, and body workers of course know this. They can feel in the body the tensions that are in fact holding the trauma experience out of consciousness. And of course Franz and his colleagues write about this in the book My Body, My Trauma, My I, is how then over time these tensions have an effect on the body and eventually turn up as very recognizable and diagnosable physical symptoms. But in my view, it's possible to think that all physical symptoms and illnesses actually may have their origins in these very early, even pre-birth traumas.
You know, you think about if the child, if a child is traumatized in the womb, already there's a tension there, there's a distress. We can understand that there are things like the cord getting around the neck of the child is a sign of a child being in distress. That actually the child, a healthy child in the womb, if they're feeling healthy and good, they manage their environment. They can take the cord off their head. They have film of it.
Wow.
So we could even say that a difficult birth may be to do with the child having been in distress in the womb. So over time, of course, when we get to an adult or even into our 40s and 50s, that's a long time for the body to hold these various tensions and to try to keep things down, and it's going to appear eventually as very physical symptoms. So I think all of these traumas have their will turn up, if not taken care of, in some way, in physicality, for sure. And the trauma of love is as well. If you think about the impulse to love someone and it's cut off,
blocked,
what do you do with that? What happens in you when your love is rejected? It's a contraction.
Okay.
It's already has to be some kind of contraction in the body, and that's likely to. It may relax in part, but it won't relax fully. And then, of course, the next thing that comes is, if I put out love again, is the same thing going to happen? And so there's already a contraction before I even do it.
In the body?
In the body, yes. And this fear, a readiness to contract in the face of my expectation of rejection.
Yeah, and what kind of emotions does a child suppress? And
well, I think in general, I don't want to be too specific, because also my memory is not so good. I'd have to go and have a look at my notes. But physical symptoms are exactly that, they're symptoms. I always think about it like the Buddhist expression, they're fingers pointing at the moon, but they're not the moon.
Oh, okay.
Right? So you see a physical symptom in an intention, of course it's valid, and it will, the representation of the physical symptom will give important information as to where the moon is, if you like, or where the real problem is, what the real problem is. Any physical symptom will do that. I don't think it's helpful to say, well, this physical symptom means this.
Yeah, of course.
Because that's being too specific, and I think we really have to keep a freedom. No, exactly. We have to keep a freedom to see, okay, what's going to emerge from this physical. So we had one case of high blood pressure and diabetes.
Yes, that's right. Which is very common in Singapore.
Is it really?
Very, very common. It is like one of the top. We call it the 3 highs,
Well, I mean, I don't think it's just Singapore. I think it's in the world.
Right.
And I do think that there's a dietary component to that. As you know, we've talked about diet things. I do think there's a dietary component to certainly diabetes, but probably also high blood pressure. But even then, you can say, why is it that people follow the information given by the food industry about how we should eat? So there's a whole issue here. I run workshops on healthy eating because I understood from my own personal work that my eating habits were also a symptom of my trauma.
Trauma, okay.
So I did a piece of work once where I had the word food in my intention. Became my mother.
Oh.
And what I realized was, if I don't get love from my mother, the one thing I did get from her was food. So then food and love became very confused for me.
Right.
And so that's an example from my own.
It's like a reference.
My own,
Mother equals to food. Yeah. Yes.
So food is a very important aspect. So these, even though I might say that diabetes is to do with diet, our diet is also, we can relate that back to how I was taught to eat, what I was brought up to eat. And what does food mean in my family? What does food mean to me in relation to
like they say comfort food.
Love. So
comfort.
We're back to the trauma of love. For me it was,
Right.
And I think for many people, food is for comfort.
Yes.
And comfort is
and the
a substitute for
in
love.
Our brains, if it is like carbohydrate, sugar.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's comfort, and comfort's a substitute for love.
It triggers the chemical of love.
Yeah.
What so often happens when you're doing these workshops is the topic comes up because people in the workshop are parents.
Yes.
And then the question comes, have I already traumatized my children? And yes, the answer is yes.
But
hard truth to take.
it's a hard truth, I know. But what goes along with that is that every step a parent takes to clarify their own psyche, to deal with their own issues, means that they then create a clearer space in which they can relate to their children. So I don't think it's anything to be ashamed of. This is how we are. We just have to take on the challenge. And one of the things that came up in the workshop also that I thought was really interesting was one of the students said, what I realize I do is I make my children the reason that I should do my personal work. This is not a good thing to do, of course.
Yeah.
You do, this is again,
It's so subtle, isn't
this
it?
is so turns upside
Yes.
down our whole societal idea. Because what we're saying is, the world is a better place if I make myself first, if I put myself first, if I look after myself first, then my children will be fine.
Right.
Rather than saying, I have to make myself better so that my children are okay. This just puts an added burden on the children. It's
That's
not,
it.
yeah,
Okay.
it's not useful for the children. Then the children become, this is another identification of the mother on the children. My children are the reason I should get healthy.
So we stress them.
Yes.
But this
Exactly.
thought really defies a lot of culture, belief
Absolutely.
system, about selflessness,
Absolutely.
not putting ourselves first.
This is why Franz's work that he's done the last 25 years is so radical. It's so radical in the world today because it turns everything upside down.
Yeah.
It turns everything that we have historically been doing for
Huge
thousands
shaking.
of years. It turns it upside down.
Huge shaking of the
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
the foundation, the very foundation that we build our lives on.
Yes,
Yeah.
and our society is very resistant to thinking in these ways. That's that's obvious.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean it's extremely challenging. Yeah, it's extremely challenging being an IOPT practitioner in our culture.
Extremely.
Yeah.
It's an understatement, maybe even.
Yeah, because
it is to some it's like quite,
people
even
look
quite
away.
impossible.
No, I can't bear this. I don't want to
I'm
think
not
that my
traumatized.
mother is a perpetrator. It's too unbearable to think about that. It's too unbearable to think that my mother will never love me.
Right.
Whoa, this is such a big thing, and it's so painful for us to take on. Hence this book. Hence
So it will be a
Franz
very
writing this book.
It will be a very painful read, right?
Well, actually,
But the truth is painful, but it will set us
no,
free.
I'm
right?
reading it at the moment because, of course, I edit the English language version,
Right.
and editing is a very different thing from reading the book. And so after the book's published, I read it,
Yes.
and then it's a damn good book.
I'm
it
sure
really
it is. I'm sure it
Yeah.
is, yeah.
It's a good book. Read it.
Okay. So what can we do about it?
Do our own personal work. Put ourselves first. Know ourselves.
Okay.
And I think this is I'm very passionate about this now. I think this is our life's work. We're here for, I'm in my 70s now.
Oh, wow,
We're not
you still
here-
look young.
We're not here for long on this world.
Oh.
And I do think that the most important thing we can do in our life is find out who we are, is really explore who we are, is
Yeah.
put ourselves first. Everybody that we come into contact with benefits if I put myself first and I get clear
Absolutely,
in my
yes.
psyche. It just makes so much sense to me. It's so logical. And I don't think, I think everything else that we do in our lives, our profession, everything else is secondary to finding out really who I am and achieving that and being who I am and fulfilling who I am.
Okay.
It's the most important thing. Sorry, I'm going on, I know. Feel very passionate about it.
Of course, yeah, you have to. I mean,
Yeah.
you are like, so immersed in it and you've seen so many cases, suffering from it. Yeah. So thank you. Thank you for your sharing and your sharing of your wisdom and your experience. And it has really been a pleasure to have you with us again.
no problem. It's lovely. It's really nice.
Yes.
It's
and
nice to have the opportunity to talk about it.
Yes, and and of course, if you have learned something from this video, please like the video and share the video link with your friends and with all the other IOPT practitioners. And I feel that there's so much more to be learned.
Did I just say, she's doing such a good job
here
in the Far East of the world in holding this work here. Yeah.
Thank you.
Really.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I mean, every topic of interview that I conduct, it's really a very valid question in my works, in my own life. So I'm just basically finding out answers for myself. Right? The benefit of both. Yeah.
Yes.
For myself and for all of you out there. Yeah. So if you want to find out more information about these works or about the method or even about training in Asia, yeah, please just write to me below, go to my email address or even visit my Facebook page to find out more information about IOPT and how it can support you in your life out there. So thank you for tuning in, and till we meet again next time. Bye-bye.